Okay, yeah. Full confession. The title of this video was a little clickbaity, but you gotta do what you gotta do with the algorithms these days, guys. If I could have, titled this video exactly what I wanted, it would have been Sir Arthur Conan Doyle would have deeply respected the author of Enola Holmes, Nancy Springer. But even as I say that, he was a rather traditional Victorian man and rather a misogynist. He was quite a loud advocate against women getting the right to vote, actually. But then again, a lot of the Sherlock Holmes stories, I feel like you can see a deep-rooted respect for women, or sympathy for women's issues. But then again, a lot of it was also the chivalry, Victorian, you need a man to protect you. Anyway. Hello, and welcome back. This is a study in stories. I am your host, Dear Stalker Darling, hence the hat. And before we do anything else, we need to acknowledge this. I had 12 followers the other day, and I knew all of them personally, which big shout out to my OGs, my day ones, everyone who'd been watching, friends, family. I love you guys. Thank you. But this is just insane that this many people would willingly want to sit and listen to me yap about Sherlock Holmes for a while. And it's especially special that it's Sherlock Holmes that has found me this kind of niche, because obviously I've had the blog on Instagram, a Bookstagram with Dear Stalker Darling for more years than I care to admit at this point, and I've never broken 1,000 followers because algorithms, I don't know. And while I started by posting about Sherlock Holmes a lot, my reading tastes really have expanded so much in the last decade, and I read so many different things now, and talking about just one fictional character on Instagram has not yielded me that many interested parties, so it's just very nice, and it's just immensely nice of all of you. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you if you've come back for more, if you've subscribed, if you've liked, and thank you so much for your comments. They have been so thoughtful and engaging, and I've especially the people who have been recommending me new Sherlock content. Please know that is the greatest gift you could give me. A lot of them I'd vaguely heard of, or I'd heard of and forgot about. So just wonderful. And a couple of brand new ones. So it's just been wonderful. And I'm so grateful. But I also completely acknowledge that, this video might get 2 views. It's just the way of things. So, I'm grateful for those who have watched and stayed or come back or whatever. Thank you. But we're here to talk about Sherlock Holmes, Enola Holmes, actually, for half an hour. And I know Enola can be as divisive as I think my take on BBC Sherlock was. So I'm honestly, I flinch a little anytime I mention Enola Holmes, especially if we're talking about the Netflix movie. There is just something about Millie Bobby Brown that attracts so much hate. And I've experienced this with a lot of things I'm a fan of. The things I've been a fan of over the year. I mean, I've been a diehard Swiftie since before Speak Now came out. I've been with her through the highs and lows. There was a time where you'd say, I like Taylor Swift, and the first thing everyone would say to you was, oh, I hate her. I didn't ask. Thank you. Whatever. And that's how it feels now a lot with Millie Bobby Brown. I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that she's a very outspoken woman. She can be rather loud, physically loud. With her Stranger Things castmate, she was always kind of the loudest in the room. And so a lot of people just are I just don't like her. And I say this as someone who went through her own experience of deconstructing this with Emma Stone, but I think a lot of that just not liking Millie Bobby Brown is a lot of internalized misogyny, because genuinely with Emma Stone, I was she's too brash, she's too loud, she's too this. And then I was why do I feel that way? No, she's pretty cool. She's pretty awesome. And it was just me having a kind of competitive internalized misogyny. We don't need to break that down right now. All of that is kind of a preface to the rest of this video in just I just politely request for everyone watching to please keep an open mind. Please keep your "I don't like her" comments to yourself. I don't really care. I didn't ask. And just come join me in the joyful, moving, and at times downright hilarious world of Enola Holmes, Sherlock Holmes's sister. Now, I addressed this in one of my Sherlock videos. I don't know. You'll have to go watch them to find out. It was my footnote in one of them about this phenomenon of Sherlock Holmes having a secret sister. And actually just the phenomenon of a female version of Sherlock Holmes has come up a lot in the last decade. And I say last decade, but Enola Holmes actually started back in 2006, which I didn't realize when I started reading them. Like a lot of people, I only found them in the last, again, 10 years. I definitely read her before the movie was being made, which actually, let me start there, because a lot of people I've talked to have said they didn't realize Enola Holmes started with a book. They thought it was just the movies on Netflix. So yes, Enola Holmes started with a series of 6 books written by Nancy Springer, and they were published from like 2006 to 2009. And this is where the whole Conan Doyle thing will start. She didn't publish anymore, but she came back, Nancy Springer, and started publishing more books in the Enola Holmes series. I think it was almost exactly at the same time as the Enola Holmes movies on Netflix started coming out. Now, as I mentioned in my last video, the Enola Holmes book series started because Nancy Springer had been, and let me preface this by saying I know all of this because of the Baker Street Babes podcast. It has not been active in quite some time, but when it was delightful and amazing. It was 2 babes, 2 girls, including Lindsay Faye, who is the best Sherlock Holmes writer alive today. I know I will have to make a whole video about that, but she is the best. She is the best. And I don't remember her partner's name. I'm so sorry. But it's a delightful podcast. They brought on a ton of authors who write new Sherlock Holmes stories, or pastiches, published fan fiction, if you will. And they brought on Nancy Springer. I think just before the Netflix movie deal came through, or right as it was like being announced that she was going to get a movie. And Nancy in this interview talks about how she had just finished writing the Rowan Hood series, which was about Robin Hood having a kind of secret daughter who like disguises herself and goes with the outlaws. And it's just kind of like these rompy adventure books for younger audiences, and puts a female character at the center of these traditional male-centric stories. On the note of Robin Hood, it really depends on which Robin Hood you read, because Roger Lanson Greene's Robin Hood stories, I swear to God, every other page he was just like, and Maid Marian, who is the coolest, and Maid Marian, who was as good at everything as Robin Hood, and Maid Marian, who could take Robin Hood in a fight. So highly recommend. Anyways. And so Nancy Springer, being a fan of Sherlock Holmes, thought, oh, okay, I'll do the same with Sherlock Holmes. Comes up with this idea of Sherlock Holmes having a younger sister. She's not a secret in the Enola Holmes series. She's just kind of, in the way that it happened a lot in Victorian times, you know, like the men in the family and the women in a family led very different lives. And Sherlock and Mycroft had a rather larger age gap between them and Enola. And actually, Sherlock and Mycroft have a fairly large age gap, which nobody talks about this. Or if anybody has, please direct me to them. But when you see a large age gap in families, especially in Victorian times, that would typically mean, and one would assume it means, either the father was like in the Navy or something, and so he was gone for like years at a time, or mom kept having miscarriages, or children kept dying in infancy, because you would expect them to continue. So there's a lot to unpack there that I have not seen anyone actually try to unpack. But anyways, so I don't want to give too much of a summary because we really need to get down to the authorial interactions to explain why Nancy and Arthur would have been, at least they could at least commiserate together. But so I don't want to like summarize too much, because you can go watch the Enola Holmes movies on Netflix. You can go pick up the books. The first ones, and even the newer ones, are pretty small. This is about the size of each of the first 6. This is the last one. I feel so fondly and strongly about this one that I had to have my own copy. But I read the majority of her books through the library. So shout out to libraries, because libraries are the best thing to ever happen to anyone. But suffice it to say, the Netflix movies pretty much follow... The first one pretty much follows the first book. Enola wakes up on her birthday to find her mother, who she's lived with. It's just been her mother, herself, and I think like 2 servants living in this big family country estate house. Not like too big of one. It's not like Mr. Darcy's house, but like a fairly, mid-sized one, whatever. And her mother has disappeared, and her mother is like her best friend. Her mother is her everything. Why would her mother just leave and not leave a note or not leave anything? She slowly starts to find that her mother did leave some secret notes for her, along with some money. And she thinks like, okay, have I been abandoned? Is my mother trying to force me into independence? Where is this going? She runs into a runaway marquis, who in the book, I swear to God, in the books, he was like, in my brain at least, he was like 8 years old. And then in the movies, he's like, handsome Hollywood love interest, which is not a critique in any way, and I might be misremembering, but it's still very trippy. I could just reread it. I won't, though. He even makes a reappearance in the later books, and I still am like, are you 9? Whatever. On that note, though, I can definitely confirm there's no real romance in the Enola Holmes books, at least definitely the first 6. And so far in the other ones, there are some... I was reading some sapphic vibes. But that's just me. But for the most part, and especially as these kids are intended for children, no romance, which I super appreciate. There's too many romances for too young of children these days. It's not even these days, when I was growing up. Anyways, the second Netflix movie takes a completely different take on the books, which I loved. They went into way more like historical detail and events, and it was I loved the second film. So I'm very excited and eager for the third one. A lot of people already have a lot of criticisms for the third one, but again, I like to approach things with an open mind. This is a little all over the place today. That's okay. The question you're probably asking yourself, that I keep getting too distracted to answer, is, okay, why did she write 6 books and then not write any until the Netflix movies were made? And it is exactly the reason you are thinking. The money. In the interview with the Baker Street Babes, Nancy explains that she saw Enola, the Enola books, when she started them, as kind of being like a Nancy Drew series. And they do, I very much feel like they're Nancy Drews, like just, anyways, where they could have just kept going. Nancy Drew goes on forever. Nancy Drew's rather formulaic, and Enola's are all very unique and different mysteries, but there didn't really seem a need for an end. She could solve mysteries forever, just as Sherlock Holmes could have, until his creator threw him off a cliff, but we're getting to that. But as she was writing the original 6th book, she got to the 6th book, and there was just such a natural character arc for Enola and for other characters. Like, there was just such perfect closure in that story that Nancy felt like, okay, that's done. Like, I've closed the book. Enola has closed the book. She is, and it really is. The 6th book is so worth getting to it. As I mentioned, it's one of my favorites. And when I read it as an e-library book, and it was one of the most perfect reading experiences I've ever had, because there is a huge reveal, huge spoiler at the end of the book. And the page that I was reading on, like, stopped, and then you turn the page and there was one sentence on that page, and that sentence was the spoiler, and then it was next chapter. But it was just such like a close the book, take 10 minutes to process. I just loved it. Like me, the Baker Street Babes asked Nancy, so there won't ever be any more books? Will there ever be any more Enola? And Nancy literally goes, well, if there's more money for Enola, I'd write more Enola books. Like, if the money's there, which is literally the most Arthur Conan Doyle thing Nancy Springer, any Sherlock Holmes author, could ever say. If you are new to the Sherlock Holmes world, this is the most important fact to know. Sherlock Holmes' creator, the writer and author of his series, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, hated Sherlock Holmes. And honestly, fair. I love Sherlock Holmes. Like so many of you, I love him. I consider him my husband, mentally, by accident. It's a whole thing. But if I were a writer and I went through what Conan Doyle went through, I would also be like, I would be feeling the same way. Imagine you're Conan Doyle for a minute. And imagine you're at dinner with Charles Dickens. It could have happened. It probably didn't. They lived similar time periods, but and actually this is probably why they never really crossed paths, for this reason. But imagine Conan Doyle and Dickens are at dinner and a bunch of fans keep coming up to them, right? They come up and they go, "Oh, Mr. Dickens, I love your books. I love your stories. Could you please sign my copy of Great Expectations? You know, I just love Pip. His story is so meaningful, whatever. Please sign my copy." And then the same fan turns to Conan Doyle and goes, "Oh, Mr. Doyle, can you get me Sherlock Holmes's autograph?" Sherlock Holmes was essentially the birth of modern fandom as we know it, where fictional characters are more popular than their creators. Before Sherlock Holmes, there really wasn't, like if you knew Frankenstein, you knew Mary Shelley. You did not have one without the other. But for many reasons, a lot of people thought Sherlock Holmes was a real person. And Conan Doyle was just like the author or the editor for Dr. Watson or whatever. And so Doyle would get honestly harassed constantly of people. Literally, people would mail him letters that said, "Hi, could you forward this on to Mr. Sherlock Holmes? I'd like to marry him." And not to mention, if you're still picturing yourself as Doyle, this was not your full-time career, okay? He was not meant to be a writer, really. He was a doctor. He was highly trained as a doctor for Victorian times. Like, if I was a time traveler, I would trust him. I would trust to go to him for some things. Definitely not any women's related health issues. Anyways, and he only wrote stories because his medical practice wasn't doing so hot for quite some time, because you couldn't like actually advertise yourself as a doctor. You just had to like know the right people. It was nepotism, man. There's a lot of nepotism in the medical world in that time. So Doyle's very smart. He's very trained, and he's just bored out of his mind waiting for patients to show up. And so he writes, and he gets quite a lot of money for some of his stories. And when he finally decides, like, okay, I'm going to devote some time and energy to writing a novel. Actually, I think this was like his second or third attempt. I think it was like his third attempt. He comes to write A Study in Scarlet. But because detective fiction was so new, right? There was just like the Edgar Allan Poe stories. And Doyle actually said he made up Sherlock Holmes because he was tired of the few detective stories where like the answer would just magically happen for the detective if there was one. Like it would just be like, "Oh, how convenient. I found the letter where the person confesses everything. I found their secret diary," or something like that. And so he wanted like an evidence-based detective where like they actually solved the clues and stuff, like an actual mystery in real life. But again, this was just his hobby. So it was like his hobby was writing, it was not his job. And then this genre of detective fiction was so new. And so like genre fiction, even today, is still like not seen as serious literature, right? Like romance genre, and even much of detective fiction is still just seen as like the genres versus literature. They don't get they have their own separate awards. They're not like, you don't see like a detective fiction winning the Pulitzer Prize or the Booker Prize or things like that. So he did not respect, he respected it as a source of income, but not as like, everyone's coming up to him and being like, "Holmes, I love him so much." And he's like, "Nice. I gotta go cure someone with tuberculosis now." Not that they could. And actually there's a whole thing about him and his wife, but whatever. Like, I just can't imagine. Like, Doyle gets a lot of critiques. I just can't imagine being like one of the most educated and trained people like in your town, and you just sit there and you get like hundreds of letters asking if someone can be Sherlock Holmes's maid. Because those were the kinds of letters he would get. So Doyle gets tired of Sherlock Holmes after 2 novels and 2 collections worth of short stories, and he kills him off. Literally, like, throws him off a cliff. In the story, he, and this is the part that always makes me laugh, is that there's a story called The Final Problem, where Watson shows up and Holmes is like, "Oh my god, I've almost been killed like 40 times this week, all because of Professor Moriarty." Dun, dun, dun. And Watson is like, "Who is this Professor Moriarty that you have never ever mentioned before in all of our time together?" Dun, dun, dun. And Holmes is like, he is the Napoleon of crime. He is the most evil person. Yeah, but like literally he's never been mentioned before. It would be like the big bad villain in a Marvel movie showing up in the last 10 minutes. If that. Like maybe 5, which they do that in the credits sometimes. But anyways, so he kills off Holmes. People are in actual mourning. Doyle's own mother like writes him a letter and is like, how could you? Like, I loved him. What are you doing? Why did you kill Sherlock Holmes? And he's dead for a decade. Doyle writes one more story that's like, here's another tale Watson wrote like before Holmes died. But I am never gonna like continue writing Sherlock Holmes stories. Just putting that out there for everyone. I'm not doing that. But then after the turn of the century, I want to say it was like 1903 or something like that, this American publisher reaches out to Conan Doyle. And in the meanwhile, Conan Doyle has kept writing. He's essentially stopped being a doctor because his writing, he made good money, even though he hated Sherlock Holmes. He made good money from those stories. He could take the money and, invest it and spend it on like time writing other stories. People knew his name. He writes these giant like histories that I've never read. Somebody, if you have, tell me what they're like. And I'm pretty sure he gets knighted in that time. Might be a little later. But the funniest part is when he gets knighted. They're like, oh yeah, for that history book you wrote. But also the prince is a really big Sherlock Holmes fan. So it's like 1903. American publisher reaches out and says, hey, write more Sherlock Holmes stories for me and we'll give you so much money. But you have to bring him back from the dead. I don't care how, but you have to bring him back from the dead. He can't just stay dead. Bring him back from the dead. And we'll give you so much money. And Doyle is like, I don't want to do that. So I will ask them for the most outrageous sum of money I can think of. And that will turn everyone off from ever asking me to write more Holmes stories again. But unfortunately from him, but not for anybody else, the American publisher was like, done. Say less. Here's your check. And so Doyle got stuck writing, oh gosh, really the majority. He wrote The Valley of Fear. He wrote, honestly, the majority of the Sherlock Holmes stories come from this second period. The majority of the good Sherlock Holmes stories are very much from that first period. The stories become kind of a mess. But without them, I'm not sure Holmes would have been what he is. I mean, that plus the whole like stage plays and the silent films. William Gillette, an American, again, really just like saved Sherlock Holmes. I know I will have to do a video on him one of these days. We'll get there. So whenever Netflix said, hey, Nancy, let's make Enola Holmes movies, and Nancy and her publisher saw $signs and she was like, picking up her pen, let's go. And it honestly just kind of like warms my heart a little bit to be like, in the true tradition of Sherlock Holmes, the authors are only in it for the money. And that's not to say that Nancy Springer, I'm sure she loves Enola. She seemed like a really lovely, down-to-earth lady in her interview. Some people on the Baker Street Babes podcast do not seem like really nice, down-to-earth people, and I'm sure I will make a video about that person at some point. But the other great thing about this latter half of these stories that are continuing for Enola are like there's more Sherlock in them, because in the beginning book she's still kind of like hiding from her brothers, but in these ones I want to say she's like Sherlock's assistant, but actually it's more like he's her assistant sometimes. And they're just hilarious. Like there's one scene in one of them, I don't even know which one. I'm pretty sure this is one of the original 6, but there's like some scene where Enola almost like, she's like trying to find someone who's missing, and she goes to this house and she almost falls in this ditch. And I'm pretty sure it's called a ha-ha. And it was like an actual like landscape. Look them up. They're hilarious. Not really. But it was just like this kind of wall in someone's lawn where if you didn't know it was there, you could like fall and die or get trapped in this ditch. And Enola almost falls. And she doesn't. But then she looks down and her brother is in the hole. I just love this image of like Sherlock Holmes stuck in a hole looking up at his little sister. And she's like, seems like you got a problem there, buddy. Honestly, just Enola is one of my favorite things. She is just such a delight as a narrator. She's joyful and quirky and really suitable for all ages. I share the books with my mom. We read them together. We love watching the movies together. She said I'm not allowed to watch the new movie without her, which I'm a little annoyed about, but it'll be fine. That was part of the problem with young Sherlock, because I was watching it with family and then there were lots of things. So Enola is like something I hope one day I can also like share with, if I should have a daughter. I just would love for this to be her introduction to Sherlock Holmes as a whole. They're fun, they're accessible, and the movies are fun and accessible. The movies are just a joy. I just think they're fun, and they're just so like watchable and rewatchable. And they bring up a lot of really good points. There's one line in the first movie where like Sherlock Holmes is like, I don't care about politics. And this woman looks at him and goes like, yeah, why would you care about something that has always benefited you anyways? I use that line in forms on some people. And the other big thing about Enola that I so appreciate, and honestly I could make a whole video about this too, is that there is such a lack of media made for young girls, like tween age, like 12-year-old girls. When I was that age, like Disney Channel was like, you know, it was the sweet life of Zach and Cody, right? It was these kids my age just living silly fun lives. It was the tail end of like That's So Raven, and like, you know, just like young people living young people's lives. And nowadays, again, you could go into like a rabbit hole deep dive into this, but I just really appreciate Enola Holmes being media made for girls, just girls. That being said, this new movie seems to have a wedding plot, which one could argue kind of ruins that argument. But, as I said, I prefer to go into things with an open mind. And with things like this, you know, the girls who watched the first Enola movie are like probably 18, 19, or early 20s now. So, you know, a marriage plot is perfectly acceptable. I'm sure they'll still be very kid-friendly movies, but yeah, I'm going to go in with an open mind. Honestly, I just want to be entertained. I'm happy to just be entertained for 2 hours. Things I want to see out of this new movie include some Sherlock and Watson time, because he was introduced at the end of the second movie. I want more about Miss Moriarty. I'm loving these new takes on Moriarty. Even in young Sherlock, just the concept of Moriarty being Irish satisfies something so deep in me. I think it's because Doyle, Moriarty was such an afterthought of just like, I need a way to kill off Sherlock Holmes, that we get no depth. And that's really why Sherlock Holmes as a whole has so much, you know, you can just do anything with him, because Doyle left so many gaps that you can just go for it. But I really like these different takes on Moriarty, because I've never really thought about him much as a character, but the young Sherlock and the Enola Holmes are really, really making my gears start to turn on this concept of like the supervillain, and also especially as Moriarty as just kind of like Holmes, right? Observant, smart, but like Holmes with a different set of morals. So, I don't know. Lots to think about. But I hope if you were a little close-minded to Enola, you've learned a little. I hope if you've only seen the movies, I might have convinced you that the books are super fun and super easy, really quick reads, so they could be like a fun rainy day thing if you're interested. The audiobooks are also really good. I did one of them as an audiobook, and yeah, well done. And if you just straight up just don't like Millie Bobby Brown, well, you know, keep that to yourself. Maybe internalize it, look at it a little more, look in the mirror, but also just keep it to yourself. Girls get enough. Girls deal with enough. I think I'm supposed to say subscribe, comment, do the things here, which you can if you want. It's really nice when you do, but also just thanks if you sat and listened. I appreciate that, and I appreciate any of your thoughtful comments, and I look forward to hearing more from all of you.